Hi everyone, this is Elathera with an instructional video that's going to take you through how to make your very own 3D paper art shadow box. Before we begin, there's a couple different things that you need to have on hand so we can do this craft together. First of all, you're going to need some glue. So any kind of glue will work. I choose to use school glue. It seems to do the job for me. The only thing I would recommend is to stay away from what's labeled as a craft glue, specifically ones for scrapbooking, as they tend not to stick as well. You're also going to need something to spread your glue with and a container to keep it in. I have a little plastic tray that I've been using, and the plastic tray is just something that was left over from something I bought. So I keep my glue inside this so it doesn't make a mess anywhere, and then to spread it I have two different tools that I use. One is just a toothpick. The toothpick is used for finer details and it works well for smoothing in small areas. If you want to use something that's a little bit bigger, you can use just like a strip of cardboard like this. It's a lot wider than the toothpick, so you're going to be able to cover more area as you spread your glue. Also, you may find it helpful to have a pair of scissors on hand in case there's any little snips or things that you need to put on your design. And last but not least, you may find if you're having difficulty working with some of the smaller pieces, to try using a pair of needle nose tweezers to help you pick them up and place them where you want them. So let's go ahead and get started. By the time you're done, you're going to have something that looks like this. So we're going to start by taking the pieces out of our package, and then we're going to put them on top of each other so you see what it'll look like when it is all done. So I'm just going to pull out everything except the background. And then if you have trouble getting the background out of your bag, you can just gently bend it, and it'll slide out. So there's a couple different pieces to your Prinny. This is the main body, and it has two arms. This arm is used for saluting, so it's going to go behind his head, where the top part of his fin is going to be just touching his head. The other arm is going to go on top towards the right half of his body, and that's actually going to be resting on top of this white piece. There's also two pieces to the Prinny's beak. The smaller piece is going to go on the bottom, and it sticks out over the left side of his head. The big piece is going to go on top of the smaller yellow piece, and it's going to cover this point on the left side, and it's going to extend over the yellow piece underneath on the right side. Prinny also has two peg legs. And there's a couple of different funny looking brown pieces in here. One of these is his belt. You can see that it has, if you look up close, dashed lines. That piece is the belt. These other two pieces we will use to make his little knapsack, or his little fanny pack. And when we're done, the fanny pack is going to rest on the left side, half on his body, half off. There's also two pieces to his scarf. The piece that I have with an indentation at the end comes off of the right side. This other piece, which has some funny looking little slits in it, is going to wrap around his body, coming from behind his head into and in front of his head. And we'll get into what all those funny shapes are for when we actually put it together. So for now, I'm just going to slide it behind. Right now, it doesn't look like how it's going to look because we need to fold it into position, but basically it's going to come around his head, and then underneath his beak, it's going to wrap around his body. And last but not least, we have his wing. So we'll tuck the wing on his right side underneath his scarf. Okay, now that we've seen generally where all the pieces are going to go, it's time that we can start putting it together. Let's start by making his little fanny pack. So these two rectangular pieces that we haven't touched yet, we're going to work with these. And you'll notice that there are a series of dashed lines on them. The dashed lines are where we're going to fold the paper. The larger piece is the actual fanny pack, and the smaller piece is meant to be one of the sides of his fanny pack, so that when we turn this into a little rectangular box, it's going to be hollow inside, and we want it to look like it's not hollow, so this little other piece is going to be used as the spacer. So let's start by just bending along all the dashed lines. If you find it hard to work with the smaller pieces, you can always use a pair of needle-nosed tweezers to help. And I'm bending each fold in the same direction. You can see with the larger piece where it's going to have a flap on the satchel in the front. And we'll actually make that piece pop out so it looks a little more pronounced as if the bag is open. So I mentioned before, when you fold this up, it's going to be hollow inside. And that's where this little tiny piece comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to glue it on the interior, just so that it looks like his bag actually has stuff in it. So let me open this up and grab our glue. We're going to take the tiny piece and use our toothpick to spread glue on those tabs that we just folded down. You may find it easier to just glue one side at a time. So once you have glue on one side, I want you to take and set it along the side of your bigger piece. I have it set so that the end of my smaller piece lines up with the first fold of my bigger piece. And I have lined it up on the side that is larger, so the end pieces of his satchel, on the right, it's a very small piece. That's the flap again for the front of his bag. That's a lot smaller than the other piece. So you'll be able to, I think, pretty quickly figure out which side it needs to be glued onto. Once we've done that side, we can then go ahead and use our toothpick to spread glue on the other tab, and then make it stick to our bigger piece. I have a little too much glue, so I'm just taking some off. You may find this step to feel a little tricky because you basically want to force the smaller piece and the big piece to come together. And it's not going to do that if you just try to hold it in place and then let go immediately. So we're going to hold it for a little bit. Wait until it adheres. It seems like it's been enough. Okay. We're going to set this aside briefly to dry for now, and then we'll come back to it later. In the meantime, let's start working with the other pieces of our Prinny. I'm going to set aside the scarf and the wings for now. And even his fins. We're going to first start by taking the white piece and using our little sticky dots to make it connect to his main body. We're going to place one of our dots about halfway up on the right side and another dot halfway up on the left side. So go ahead and take your packet and peel out two of the little dots. If you're having trouble peeling them out, I found that if you bend this, get your fingernail underneath, so you're grabbing at the foam from its side, pinch it, and pull, that it comes out. So let's go ahead and take our white piece. We're going to flip it over to the back side to put our adhesives on. Again, we want one halfway up on the right side and halfway up on the left side. You also want to press down on them and hold them in place for a few seconds to make sure that it actually adheres to your material. And it looks like mine didn't, so I will use another one. It can take a while to get used to working with the little sticky pieces. And in a pinch, the entire thing is sticky. So if you find that you're running low, you can always just peel the backing off of the rest of it and use that. Okay, so now that we have those positioned, I also want us to add dots down where his feet are going to join with his body. We're going to put one stack of dots here. I want us to make this 2 dots high instead of 1. So one stack with 2 dots stacked on top of each other. And then we're going to do the same thing for his other leg. So go ahead and get out 4 dots and squish them together to make sets of 2. So what I am doing is just taking 2 dots at a time and pinching them together between my fingers to make sure that they stick to one another. Then I'm going to peel the backing off. Set it on the paper and press down firmly again. And do the same thing for his other leg. Okay, now we're ready to put the first piece to his main body. We're going to peel the backing off the first 2 dots that we put on. So the one halfway up on the left side and halfway up on the right side. So peel the backing off just on those 2. And we're going to do the feet later. Now that I peeled it off, it's sticky. And you want to position it on your Prinny so that the white on the left side lines up with the curvature of his body. Once you're satisfied with where you've put it, go ahead and press firmly on your 2 dots. And now it's held in place. Now it's time to do the feet. So I'm going to bend these underneath a little bit, our edges here, so that it looks like his feet kind of wrapping around to the bottom of the white section. Then we're going to peel the backing off and put his legs on. So go ahead and peel the backing off of your 2 stacks of dots on the bottom. And you just want to place the legs to make it look like he's walking. So they're going to be basically perpendicular from the shape of his body. You can have them close together, far apart, have one angled at a different angle if you want to make it look like he's walking. So if I have 2 facing perpendicular, it's going to look like he's standing in place. If you want him to look like he's walking, you can angle one so it looks like he is mid-step. And again, when you put them on, you just want to press and hold them in place for a few seconds to make sure that they stay. Next, let's do his beak. We're going to glue the lower half of his beak directly onto his body. And we're going to do that right where the curvature on the left side starts to change from his body to his neck area and then gets into his head. So once you're ready, go ahead and take some glue. Spread it on the back. Find the position that you like. And then press down to make sure that it stays. What we're going to do with this top piece is we want to bring it further away from his body to make it look like his beak has some dimension to it. So we are going to put 2 dots side by side on the top part of his beak, right where I'm pointing with my toothpick. So 1 dot here, 1 dot here, side by side. Once you've put your dots on, feel free to make this piece look a little more three-dimensional by bending or curving the edges. Basically, I'm going along the edges with my finger and just gently pinching the whole way around. We're basically trying to make something that looks, well, that is 2D, into something that is more 3D. So we're doing that by first creating layers to give it depth, and then trying to make it look more three-dimensional by bending and folding the pieces. So here's my bent beak. Then once you've found, once you've finished folding it, go ahead and peel the backing off. And we're gonna stick it on top of the lower half of the Prinny's beak. Remember that you want a little piece to hang off of the right side, and it's going to cover the top portion poking out. Press and hold in place for a little bit to make sure that it stays. Now let's return to our satchel for a moment. It should be dry by now, because we want to complete this guy. So I want us to do 2 things. One is I want us to fold out the front flap of his satchel, and then I want us to glue the flap of his satchel along the top side, only the top. So what we will end up doing is placing glue right where my toothpick is. That way we're going to have a box that stays together, but at the same time allowing us to have the flexibility to make it look like this flap is partially open. So go ahead and take your flap and start using your fingers to pinch it so that it looks like the corners and bottom are turning up. You can see when I close it now that it's coming away from the rest of his satchel. Then once you're ready, go ahead and glue along the top. We're going to need to, again, because the paper doesn't want to stay here, hold it in place for a little bit while the glue starts to dry. So I'm pressing on the outside with fingers from one hand, and then I'm using my fingers on my other hand to push in the opposite direction. So these fingers are pushing down, my other fingers are pushing up. It's tricky because you don't want to push so hard that you're going to make your little box collapse. Okay, we're gonna set that aside to dry for a little bit again. In the meantime, let's go ahead and put his belt on. One side is completely straight, the other side has a little bit of a curve to it. You actually want to have it so that the straight edge is on the left and the curved edge is on the right. And it looks like I have my curved edge upside down. You want the curved edge to follow the contour of his body. So again, curved edge is on the right, and it should follow the contour of his body. The straight edge on the left doesn't matter so much because we're gonna cover it with the satchel so nobody's gonna see it. But this is his little belt that the satchel rests on. So we want to make it come away from his body. And in order to do that, we're going to place 2 dots stacked on top of each other, approximately in the middle. Go ahead and take 2 more dots out, stick them together. And then place them on your belt. Once they're on, let's gently fold our belt so it looks like it's wrapping around his body. Then go ahead and peel off the backing. And place the belt on your Prinny. Now we're going to move on to some of the trickier pieces. And this is perhaps the toughest piece to work with inside your box. So this is his scarf. There's a little perforated edge here, which we're going to fold down, and that marks where it is going to wrap around the other side of his head. So that's to help guide us on where we need to put it. Then we have this piece with a slit cut into it, and 2 more pieces here with slits cut into them. The bottom slit is so that we can make it look like there's multiple layers to his scarf wrapping around the front of him. These other 2 slits are to allow us to actually bend the scarf around the back of his head to make it look like it's coming from back to front. So we're gonna work with the big lower slit first. And basically all we want to do is we want to take the edge of it and we're going to put it underneath the rest of his scarf. So I've taken the edge and I'm just bending it behind the scarf. If you want to see what that looks like on the back, you can see where I'm pinching it. And basically where my fingers are right now is where we're going to glue it. Again, we're doing something where we're folding the paper in a way that it doesn't necessarily want to bend very well. So you're going to want to make sure you hold it in place for a few seconds once you've glued it on. So I put glue on the end, folding it under, pinching to hold it in place. Now while we're waiting for that to dry, let's pick up our other piece of the scarf. And for this one, we just want to do some bending and folding to make it look like his scarf is flowing. So to me, it looks like the very end of it is coming towards the front, or closer in the foreground, and that the top half of the scarf is further away or in the background. So I'm going to bend it right where my finger is now, just so we have the front of it coming in the foreground. And this looks like it's waving in the wind at the very end. So we can maybe bend these corners down, the very tips of it, bending them backwards. Or maybe I'll do the right side backwards and the front side forwards, just to make it look like it's waving around. Most of the rest of the top piece of his scarf will be hidden behind his body and we won't see it. Hopefully by now your first piece of your scarf is dry or close to drying. Why don't we go ahead and bend the bottom down a little bit, again trying to make it look more 3D and less flat paper. I'm just pinching the edges. Okay, and then for the top half, we need to be able to bend it around from front to back of his body. So to do that, we need to take these two slits and we're going to coax the top half of our paper to basically bend in such a way that is going to enable us to do that. So where I'm trying to make the paper bend is on the leftmost slit, the really teeny tiny piece towards the top that still attaches them. That's where I'm forcing the paper to bend. And again, the same thing, but to a lesser extent, on right above the slit on the right side. I'm taking the top piece and just pushing it with my fingers to push it underneath the other piece. So I'll do that again. What we're going to end up doing is gluing the top right section, right where my toothpick is, on the back of his head. And with the flap that we folded down earlier, in the very bottom right section, we're going to glue that on the back side and then glue that to his head. So let's show where we would position this on him before we start gluing. You want it to wrap underneath his beak, and again have it so that the tab on the right side is your marker for where it needs to wrap around his body. Once you've found a position you think makes the most sense, go ahead and glue the two pieces down that we talked about. So the little tab and the top section that goes behind his head. You might find it easier to glue one of these in place before starting on the other one. So I have chosen to glue only one piece down. I'm pressing it behind him to make sure that it stays. And then I'm gonna let the glue dry until tackling the other piece. While we wait, we can start working on the wing. Most of the wing is going to be hidden behind the Prinny's body and scarf. So the flat section. There is a dashed line so that we can bend the wings and make them look more 3D. So I'm going to pinch along the edge. It gets a little bit tricky at the top because the paper is so thin up there. But do the best you can to follow the little guidelines. So I bent it to make it look like the letter A instead of the letter V. Now we can take the edges, and right now they're bent to have them go towards the background. We're gonna fold them back to curve as if they're coming towards the foreground. So take the edge of the wing and fold it up. And do the same thing on the other side. So Prinny's other fin is going to go on top of his belt and underneath his scarf. So when we insert it, we can do so that you have it on top of his belt and just gently slide the top of his fin so that it'd be under his scarf. A little bit of his fin is going to be sticking out the right side. And again, we want to add some depth here, so we are going to use dots and fold the edges down. So we are going to place 2 dots towards the top, side by side. Then I'm going to peel off the backing. And pinch the edges down along the side. The only exception is the very tip of his fin on the bottom. I want to just curve that out. It just looks like it would flap outward. Then we, again, slide it over his belt and underneath his scarf. And once you have it where you like it, go ahead and press and hold it into place. So now there's only a couple pieces left before we're all done. We're going to put the scarf on next, so the rest of his scarf. And you're just going to glue it behind his head. So figure out a position that looks good so it looks like it's coming out from the other side. So if this was one actual piece of cloth, let's wrap it around in the front of him and then back behind him. I'm just trying to match the contour of where it would fold behind his head. And go ahead and glue it on the back side. We're going to attach the wing behind his body too. And we want to make this stand out a little more in the, coming from the background into the foreground. So we're going to put one dot on the end. And you want to attach it so that it looks like it's below his head near the top of where his shoulders would be. Because if you think about where the wings come out on mythical creatures, you see them coming out of the shoulder blades. Just slide it behind, right about where you think his shoulder blades are. And again, press and hold in place. Okay, now we're ready to attach everything to the background. We're gonna start by just trying to look at the layout here where we want to put him. We basically want to have him centered. You want to make sure that you leave a little bit of room on the sides, because when you put it in your three-dimensional box, your three-dimensional frame, it has a little lip on the edge. And actually we're all done with glue. We're gonna have his satchel also extend out to one side, so let's keep that in mind as we're putting this together. For the satchel, we are going to put one dot at the very tip of the belt on the left side. That will go on the furthest right side of the satchel. So the dot on the belt is going to line up with where I'm holding my toothpick. Then we're going to put a second dot on the satchel on the other side on the back, and that is going to attach to the background. But before we do that step, let's go ahead and give some depth between the background and our Prinny. We're going to put a stack of dots 2 high in the lower corner of him, and then let's put another dot on his flap. So one stack of 2 dots on the lower corner. One dot on his fin, and we can place it on top of the other dots that we placed previously. That's going to make it more secure. Okay, go ahead and peel those off. And then put the Prinny on your background. Now let's do the satchel. So one dot on the belt, one dot on the satchel. It's a little tricky to press and hold the dot on the satchel in place, so if you aren't able to get your fingers in there, use tweezers. Then peel the backing off of your 2 pieces. And position the satchel so that it's coming off of his belt. I have my finger inside the satchel to press and hold the foam dots in place. Again, you can use a pair of tweezers. Now you're all done.